In the early morning darkness of December 19th, 1944, as frost covered the dense forests surrounding Neuville, Belgium, a German tank commander named Unteroffizier Klaus Wendel sat cramped inside his Panther tank's turret, struggling to write in his personal notebook with fingers that barely responded inside frozen gloves. The time was precisely 6:23 in the morning, and his breath created visible clouds in the confined space as he attempted to document something that troubled him deeply. His notes described a new American Predator that had appeared on the battlefield, something his unit could hear but never actually see before it disappeared. The Wehrmacht was losing tanks at an alarming rate, with 3 Tiger tanks destroyed just the previous day, and nobody could explain exactly how it was happening. Through the commander's cupola, Wendell peered into the pre-dawn gloom of the Ardennes forest, knowing that somewhere beyond the tree line, American forces were already moving into position. What he couldn't possibly know at that moment was that the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion's M18 Hellcats were already deploying for their next attack. In exactly 17 minutes, everything Wendell understood about armored combat would be fundamentally challenged by an American vehicle that violated every single principle of tank warfare that the German military had perfected and refined over 5 long years of conflict across multiple theaters of war. The Panther tank that Wendell commanded represented what German engineers considered the pinnacle of their craft. Its 75mm main gun possessed the capability to penetrate the armor of any American tank at ranges extending to 2,000 meters, giving German crews a substantial standoff advantage in most engagements. The frontal armor plating could deflect the majority of Allied anti-tank shells, and the vehicle embodied German military philosophy perfectly: heavy construction, overwhelming firepower, and methodical tactical employment. Yet within just 3 minutes of the first contact with American forces that morning, Wendell would personally witness the destruction of multiple German tanks by vehicles that moved at speeds his own tank couldn't achieve, even on perfectly paved roads, let alone in the rough terrain of the Belgian forests. The Battle of the Bulge had entered its 4th day, and across the frozen landscape of Belgium and Luxembourg, German tank crews were confronting a terrifying new reality. The Americans had developed and fielded something that hunted in a completely different manner than any armored vehicle that had previously existed in military history. It wasn't more heavily armed than German tanks, and it certainly wasn't more heavily armored. Instead, it was simply faster than anything the Germans had imagined could possibly survive on a modern battlefield where artillery, anti-tank guns, and aircraft dominated. The genesis of the M18 Hellcat began in December 1941, just as the United States formally entered the global conflict. While German tank doctrine had evolved from fundamental principles emphasizing overwhelming firepower combined with maximum protection, leading to the development of 45-ton Panther tanks and massive 69.8-ton King Tiger heavy tanks, American designers working at General Motors pursued a radically different approach that would ultimately terrify German crews 3 years later, when they first encountered the results on European battlefields. The Tank Destroyer Force was officially established following General Leslie McNair's directive issued on November 21st, 1941. This new branch operated on a deceptively simple principle that was carefully documented in Field Manual FM 18-5, which emphasized 3 core concepts: seek out enemy armor, strike decisively, and destroy the target. The critical emphasis was placed on speed and firepower rather than on protective armor, which represented a fundamental departure from conventional tank design philosophy that had dominated military thinking since the First World War. The M18, which carried the designation T-70 during its development phase, would embody this philosophy to an extreme degree that German tank designers would have considered absolutely suicidal. The Buick Motor Division, located in Flint, Michigan, and not to be confused with the nearby Grand Blanc facility where Sherman tanks were manufactured, received the production contract in January 1942. Chief Engineer Joseph Roberts faced what appeared to be contradictory specifications that seemed almost impossible to reconcile within a single vehicle design. The requirements demanded that the vehicle mount a 76mm high-velocity gun capable of destroying any German tank in the field, maintain a low profile suitable for concealment in varied terrain, and achieve road speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour, all while keeping the total combat weight under 20 tons. Meeting any two of these requirements would have been challenging. Meeting all three simultaneously seemed to defy the fundamental principles of armored vehicle design that had been established over decades of development. The solution that Roberts and his engineering team developed defied every convention of tank design that had been established up to that point. The M18's armor protection measured merely 25.4 millimeters at its thickest point, found on the turret front, while the hull front armor was a shockingly thin 12.7 millimeters, barely sufficient to stop heavy machine gun fire. A German 88mm anti-tank shell wouldn't just penetrate such thin armor. It would pass completely through both sides of the vehicle without even slowing down. The design philosophy prioritized mobility above absolutely everything else, accepting vulnerability as the price for unprecedented speed and maneuverability. The American breakout from Normandy provided the first significant combat test of this revolutionary concept, and it was there that German tank crews first encountered what would rapidly become their worst nightmare on the battlefield. On July 29, 1944, near the French town of Coutances, elements of German heavy tank battalions filed disturbing engagement reports describing encounters with American tank destroyers that simply disappeared before German crews could effectively return fire. After-action reports documented enemy vehicles demonstrating speeds estimated at 80 kilometers per hour over rough terrain, with total engagement times from the first shot fired to the last sighting of the target lasting approximately 180 seconds. The mathematics of these engagements were both simple and absolutely terrifying for German crews. A Panther tank's turret required a full 60 seconds to complete a 360-degree rotation using its manual traverse system. The Panther's maximum road speed was 34 miles per hour, dropping to approximately 15 miles per hour when moving cross-country through rough terrain. In stark contrast, the M18 Hellcat could accelerate from a complete stop to 30 miles per hour in just 7 seconds, maintain sustained speeds of 55 miles per hour on improved roads, reach 60 miles per hour with the governor removed, and maintain 26 miles per hour even when moving cross-country through difficult terrain. In the 3 minutes it took a German crew to identify an incoming threat, rotate their turret to face it, acquire the target through their gun sights and fire their weapon, the Hellcat could displace nearly 1.5 miles from its original firing position. This meant that by the time the German gun was aimed and ready to fire, the target had simply vanished, and the crew had no idea where to look for it next. The fear that German crews experienced wasn't irrational or the result of panic. It was a perfectly reasonable response to a genuine tactical problem that their training and equipment hadn't prepared them to handle. The M18's 76mm M1A2 main gun, while unable to penetrate Panther frontal armor when using standard M62 AAP-CBC ammunition, could easily defeat the 40mm side armor at ranges extending to 1,500 meters. With the much rarer M93 HVAP tungsten core rounds, though these were severely limited in supply, with individual crews receiving only 1 or 2 rounds per month if they were fortunate, Penetration performance reached 157 millimeters at 500 yards. The gun's muzzle velocity of 2,600 feet per second meant that the projectile arrived at the target before the sound of the shot, giving German crews no acoustic warning of incoming fire. German doctrine emphasized methodical engagement procedures with careful target acquisition, deliberate aiming, and strict conservation of ammunition due to increasingly strained logistics. Crews received extensive drilling on fighting from static defensive positions, using terrain features for hull-down placement that maximized their armor protection while minimizing their exposure. The Panther and Tiger tanks were specifically designed to support this tactical doctrine, with heavy armor protection, powerful main guns, and stable platforms for accurate long-range gunnery, even if this came at the cost of speed and mobility. The Hellcat shattered every single aspect of this carefully developed training and doctrine. M18 crews trained at Camp Hood, Texas, which had been established specifically as the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center on a massive 158,706 acres of land, were taught to never remain stationary for more than 30 seconds after firing their weapon. The unit motto became, "Speed is life," and this wasn't mere motivational rhetoric, it was fundamental survival doctrine. Where German training emphasized making the single decisive shot that would destroy the enemy, American tank destroyer doctrine preached constant movement through what crews called shoot and scoot tactics. Between July 1943 and October 1944, Buick's Flint, Michigan manufacturing plant produced exactly 2,507 M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, which was far fewer than the originally planned production run of 8,986 vehicles. The actual production included 6 pilot models built for testing and evaluation, an initial production contract for 1,000 vehicles, and a final order totaling 1,507 units. Peak monthly production reached 267 units during November 1943, representing the maximum output the facility achieved during the entire production run. This production rate, while modest when compared to the massive numbers of Sherman tanks being manufactured at multiple facilities across the United States, still significantly exceeded German Panther production capabilities. While Germany struggled to produce approximately 90 Panther tanks monthly by late 1944 due to material shortages, bombing damage to factories, and transportation difficulties, American factories had already completed the entire Hellcat production run more than a year earlier. This production disparity meant that while German commanders knew each lost Panther or Tiger was essentially irreplaceable, given their manufacturing constraints, American forces could rapidly replace any Hellcat losses and still have vehicles to spare for training and reserve units. The M18 featured a Wright-R 975 radial engine that had originally been designed for aircraft applications, bringing aviation reliability to ground combat vehicles. Early production vehicles, covering serial numbers from 1 through 1,350, utilized the naturally aspirated R975C1 variant that produced 350 horsepower, while later production models, serial numbers 1,351 through 2,507, received the supercharged R975C4 engine that generated 400 horsepower, with this upgrade being implemented beginning in March 1944. This substantial power output, combined with the vehicle's combat weight that ranged from 17.7 to 20 tons, depending on specific configuration and equipment load, created an exceptional power-to-weight ratio of approximately 20 to 22.5 horsepower per ton. This compared dramatically favorably to the Panther's power-to-weight ratio of approximately 15 horsepower per ton, giving the Hellcat far superior acceleration and sustained speed capabilities. The Hellcat's hydromatic automatic transmission with torque converter technology allowed drivers to maintain maximum speed while maneuvering aggressively, which represented a critical tactical advantage over German tanks that required manual shifting and clutch operation, forcing drivers to reduce speed during gear changes. The ground pressure of just 10.5 pounds per square inch, which was actually less than many wheeled vehicles of similar weight, meant Hellcats could traverse mud and snow conditions that completely immobilized 57-ton Tiger I tanks with their 15.2 pounds per square inch ground pressure and the massive 69.8-ton Tiger II heavy tanks that exerted even greater ground pressure. The Allied breakout from Normandy during August 1944 provided the first large-scale demonstration of Hellcat doctrine being applied exactly as it had been envisioned during development. During Operation Cobra, which commenced on July 28, 1944, the 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, which had received its M18 vehicles in October 1943 and landed at Utah Beach on July 21st and 22nd, participated in the rapid sweep through the Brittany Peninsula. The 704th and 705th Tank Destroyer Battalions, also equipped with M18 Hellcats, joined this rapid advance as American forces broke out of the confined Normandy hedgerow country. Traditional tank warfare doctrine would have dictated careful, methodical approaches using cover and concealment, followed by sustained firefights with the enemy. Instead, M18 crews executed what became known as rapid flanking attacks, using their superior speed to strike from unexpected directions and angles before German turrets could possibly traverse quickly enough to meet the threat. This represented not just a new vehicle, but an entirely new way of conducting armored operations. The Battle of Araucourt, fought from September 18th through 29th, 1944, not in October as sometimes incorrectly reported in secondary sources, near the Nancy bridgehead across the Moselle River in eastern France, demonstrated the M18's full potential when the vehicle was properly employed according to its design doctrine. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, operating while attached to the 4th Armored Division's Combat Command A, faced elements of the German 113th Panzer Brigade under conditions that should theoretically have favored the defending German forces. On September 19th, Lieutenant Edwin Leiper's platoon engaged German armor in conditions of heavy fog that limited visibility to approximately 30 feet, creating extremely close-range combat at ranges that German crews would have considered suicidal for the lightly armored American vehicles. In the first 5 minutes of contact, his M18 crews destroyed 5 German tanks while losing just 1 vehicle to enemy fire. The engagement continued throughout the day, with 10 additional enemy tanks destroyed in exchange for the loss of 2 more M18. Captain Tom Evans earned the Distinguished Service Cross after personally manning the main gun of a disabled M18 to destroy enemy panzers that were attempting to flank American positions. The overall results at Araucourt proved staggering when final tallies were compiled. 39 German tanks were destroyed in exchange for 4 M18 tank destroyers lost and 3 damaged, producing a kill ratio of 5.6 to 1 that validated the entire tank destroyer concept that had been controversial within some army circles. This single engagement demonstrated that speed and aggressive tactics could overcome seemingly superior enemy armor and firepower. The Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the West, launched in December 1944, became the Hellcat's most legendary proving ground and cemented its reputation among both American and German forces. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, which had been described by General Andrew D. Bruce as the finest tank destroyer battalion yet trained, rushed forward to help defend the critical road junction at Bastogne, providing desperately needed armored support for the surrounded 101st Airborne Division. during December 19th and 20th, 1944, near the village of Neuville. M18 Hellcats from both the 609th and 705th Tank Destroyer Battalions engaged elements of the advancing German 2nd Panzer Division. The 609th arrived first as part of Team Dessabry, and their actions, combined with those of the 10th Armored Division elements, inflicted between 600 and 1,000 German casualties while achieving a crucial 48-hour delay that allowed American reinforcements to reach Bastogne before it was completely encircled. The 705th would later receive a Presidential Unit Citation for their actions at Bastogne, covering the period from December 18th through 27th, 1944. On Christmas Day, 1944 alone, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion destroyed 27 German tanks while losing 6 M18s in the process, maintaining their exceptional kill ratios even during the most desperate and confused fighting of the entire campaign. The battalion engaged elements of the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division throughout the day in combat that raged across multiple positions around the Bastogne perimeter. Overall, during the entire siege of Bastogne, the 705th destroyed approximately 40 German tanks in exchange for 6 M18 losses, achieving a remarkable kill ratio of 6.7 to 1 under extremely difficult combat conditions. The Hellcat's tactical advantages actually increased rather than decreased in adverse weather and terrain conditions. While German heavy tanks struggled to maintain mobility in the deep mud and heavy snow that characterized the Ardennes winter, the M18's lightweight construction and low ground pressure allowed crews to maintain mobility when their opponents could barely move. During the opening phase of the German offensive, heavy fog grounded Allied air support and limited ground visibility to under 100 meters, conditions that should have favored German forces. German tactical doctrine had traditionally relied heavily on long-range gunnery superiority, which was now completely negated by the weather conditions. Hellcat crews, who had been specifically trained for close-range ambush tactics during their intensive preparation at Camp Hood's Revolutionary Battle Conditioning course, actually thrived in these conditions that German crews found so challenging. The Americans were fighting exactly the way they had trained, while German doctrine had prepared crews for very different types of engagements. The M18's lightweight construction provided strategic mobility advantages that German heavy tanks simply couldn't match under any circumstances. While a King Tiger tank required Class 70 bridges, which were extremely rare in Europe and required either intact major bridges or specialized military bridging equipment, the M18 could cross any Class 24 bridge, which was basically any structure capable of supporting a fully loaded truck. This seemingly technical detail had enormous tactical implications during Rhine River crossing operations. While German heavy tanks searched desperately for intact bridges strong enough to support their massive weight, often finding that retreating German forces had already demolished such structures, Hellcats crossed freely on temporary bridges erected by American combat engineers in just hours. This mobility advantage allowed American forces to establish bridgeheads and expand them before German reinforcements could arrive. While American factories successfully produced 2,507 M18 Hellcats between July 1943 and October 1944, completing the entire production run in approximately 15 months, Germany struggled throughout the entire war to produce adequate numbers of heavy tanks, despite devoting enormous resources to the effort. Total Panther production over the entire war reached approximately 6,000 vehicles produced at multiple factories. Only 492 King Tiger tanks were ever manufactured, despite their fearsome reputation, and 1,347 Tiger I tanks were built during the model's production run. the mathematics of industrial capacity proved absolutely inescapable, regardless of German tactical skill or crew bravery. For every Panther tank that Germany managed to produce, America built 8 tank destroyers and tanks in total, representing an overwhelming material advantage that no amount of tactical skill could overcome. German tank crews faced not just superior tactics, but crushing numerical superiority. American armored vehicle production during the war years included 49,234 M4 Sherman medium tanks, 2,507 M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, 2,324 M10 tank destroyers, and 2,073 M36 tank destroyers, plus an additional 88,410 other armored vehicles including tank variants, armored cars, and specialized vehicles. This industrial output dwarfed anything Germany could hope to achieve, especially after sustained Allied bombing campaigns targeted German production facilities and transportation networks. German tank crew training during 1944 continued to emphasize the traditional methodical engagement procedures that had been developed during earlier campaigns. Training stressed careful target acquisition, deliberate aiming, and strict conservation of ammunition due to increasingly severe shortages. However, by late 1944, veteran German tank crews who possessed actual combat experience were becoming increasingly rare as casualties mounted. Replacement crews frequently received minimal training, sometimes consisting of just 2 weeks of hasty instruction before being sent directly to face combat against experienced Allied forces. American Hellcat crews, in stark contrast, received extensive and comprehensive training at Camp Hood, which would later be renamed Fort Hood, Texas. The tank destroyer school program included 17 weeks of intensive training with heavy emphasis on speed, mobility, and individual initiative, rather than rigid adherence to doctrine. The massive facility, commanded initially by Lieutenant Colonel and later Brigadier General Andrew D. Bruce, possessed the capacity to train up to 100,000 soldiers simultaneously, with 28 battalions and 8 groups in various stages of preparation at any given time. Crews practiced high-speed firing while on the move, rapid displacement after engaging targets, and coordinated attacks with other vehicles until these complex procedures became completely instinctive responses rather than conscious actions requiring thought. The Revolutionary Battle Conditioning Course, which was originally called the Tank Hunting Course, became the first U.S. Army training program to employ live fire overhead, while trainees maneuvered below, with soldiers spending a full week in simulated combat conditions that closely replicated actual battlefield stress. By late 1944, American tank destroyer doctrine had evolved significantly from the initial concepts into proven combat techniques refined through hard-won battlefield experience. Field Manual FM-18-5, published in June 1942, clearly stated that there is but one battle objective of tank destroyer units, the destruction of hostile tanks. General Bruce later provided clarification that seek meant vigorous and aggressive reconnaissance, strike meant destruction through accurate gunfire rather than physical ramming charges, and destroy meant complete elimination of the enemy's combat capability. Actual combat experience, particularly the difficult lessons learned during North African battles, taught American forces that pure offensive charges against prepared enemy positions were invariably suicidal, regardless of vehicle capabilities. Instead, aggressive spirit had to be combined intelligently with stealth, deception, and careful exploitation of terrain to become the true cornerstone of successful tank destroyer employment in actual combat conditions. M18 crews developed what they called Wolfpack tactics, wherein 3 or 4 Hellcats would operate in coordinated but independently maneuvering attacks. Crews communicated continuously by radio to create overlapping fields of fire while maintaining constant movement, ensuring that if one vehicle was engaged by enemy fire, the others could immediately engage the threat from different angles. This fluid, dynamic combat style proved devastatingly effective against German forces trained for more static defensive operations. By the war's conclusion in Europe during May 1945, M18 Hellcat units had achieved truly remarkable combat statistics that validated the entire controversial concept. The Army Historical Foundation documents a total of 526 enemy armored vehicle kills, with 498 achieved in Northwest Europe, 17 in the Italian theater, and 11 in the Pacific theater against Japanese forces, with approximately 216 M18s lost to enemy fire, specifically in the European theater. This produced an overall kill-to-loss ratio of 2.4 to 1, or 2.3 to 1:1 when examining Europe specifically, which represented the highest ratio of any US tank or tank destroyer throughout World War II. Individual unit achievements frequently exceeded even these impressive average figures by substantial margins. The 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion destroyed upwards of 90 enemy armored fighting vehicles during their combat service. The 704th achieved similar numbers, with their single Aracourt engagement alone accounting for 39 confirmed kills. The 705th's exceptional performance at Bastogne, where they destroyed 40 German tanks while losing only 6 of their own vehicles, demonstrated sustained excellence under the most demanding combat conditions. The 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion achieved the highest documented ratio of nearly 23 to 1. Though this included engagements against lighter German vehicles and self-propelled guns, as well as tanks. Analysis of M18 combat losses revealed interesting patterns about how the vehicles were actually destroyed in combat. Between 40 and 50% of M18 casualties resulted directly from enemy tanks and dedicated anti-tank guns that exploited the vehicle's minimal armor protection, particularly when Hellcats were caught in static positions or unable to maneuver. Another 25 to 35% of losses stemmed from mechanical breakdowns that left vehicles immobilized and vulnerable. The remaining losses came from a variety of sources, including infantry anti-tank weapons, artillery fire, and mines, with no single category dominating. The fundamental philosophical difference between German and American armored vehicle design becomes starkly clear when directly comparing technical specifications between vehicles. The Panther weighed exactly 44.8 to 45 metric tons and featured 80mm frontal armor sloped at 55 degrees, which was effective against most Allied anti-tank weapons and approximately equivalent to 140mm of vertical armor. The Tiger Y weighed 57 metric tons and mounted 100mm vertical frontal armor. The massive King Tiger reached 69.8 metric tons with 150mm sloped frontal armor and 180mm turret armor, making it nearly impervious to most Allied tank and anti-tank guns from the front. Against this German emphasis on protection, the M18 Hellcat weighed just 17.7 to 20 metric tons, depending on specific configuration, with armor protection ranging from a mere 12.7mm on the hull to 25.4mm on the turret front, which was actually thinner than some German armored cars and reconnaissance vehicles. Yet this apparent vulnerability, which seemed almost suicidal to German tank designers, enabled the extraordinary speed that became the vehicle's primary defensive characteristic rather than passive armor protection. At a range of 500 meters, a Hellcat moving perpendicular to a Tiger tank's line of fire at 40 miles per hour would cross the German tank's entire gun arc in just 4.5 seconds, which was faster than a German gunner could possibly track the target using manual traverse controls, especially after hydraulic traverse failure, which was a common occurrence in combat conditions due to damage or maintenance issues. This meant that speed itself became armor, as German gunners simply couldn't track targets moving that fast. Beyond just raw speed, the M18 demonstrated markedly superior mechanical reliability when compared to German heavy tanks throughout sustained operations. The Wright R975 radial engine, derived from proven and mature aircraft engine designs, started reliably even in sub-zero winter conditions that defeated many other engines. German tank crews, using diesel engines that required careful warm-up procedures especially in cold weather, couldn't understand how American Hellcats could start instantly and accelerate immediately without any warm-up period. The Panther's sophisticated transmission system, while technically advanced and representing impressive engineering, proved fragile and unreliable under harsh combat conditions. Final drive failures plagued the Panther design throughout its entire service life, with many vehicles being lost to mechanical breakdown rather than enemy action. The Tiger II's extreme mechanical complexity meant that more King Tigers were ultimately lost to mechanical failures and lack of spare parts than to actual enemy fire. Meanwhile, the M18's relatively simplified design, which used proven automotive components wherever possible rather than developing new specialized parts, ensured consistent operational readiness rates that exceeded German vehicles. American logistical superiority dramatically amplified the M18's inherent tactical effectiveness. While German tanks frequently sat idle for extended periods due to lack of fuel, unavailable spare parts, or ammunition shortages, Hellcat units maintained high operational readiness rates through efficient and reliable supply chains. The famous Red Ball Express truck convoy system and similar dedicated logistics operations ensured consistent fuel deliveries even during rapid advances, while standardized parts across American vehicles meant that field maintenance teams could easily repair damaged vehicles. German forces, particularly by late 1944 and early 1945, faced chronic and increasingly severe fuel shortages that crippled their operational capabilities. Operation Watch on the Rhine, the formal German name for the Ardennes offensive, was partially planned around capturing intact Allied fuel dumps because German logistics simply couldn't sustain prolonged offensive operations at the tempo required. This desperate fuel situation meant that German tanks increasingly fought defensively from static prepared positions, which was exactly the tactical situation where the mobile Hellcat held maximum advantage. Every M18 Hellcat carried both radio and intercom systems that functioned reliably in combat conditions. SCR 508 or SCR 528 radio sets provided consistent communication between vehicles and with higher headquarters, allowing coordinated operations at both tactical and operational levels. German tanks, especially by late 1944, as production quality deteriorated and experienced crews became casualties, often operated with degraded or completely non-functional communications equipment, forcing crews to rely on pre-battle signal flags, pre-arranged plans, or simply following the lead vehicle. This seemingly minor technical detail had enormous tactical implications during actual combat operations. Hellcat platoons could coordinate attacks in real time, continuously adjusting to German responses and changing situations instantly as the battle developed. When 4 Hellcats attacked from different directions simultaneously, they operated as a single coordinated organism through constant radio communication, with each crew aware of what the others were doing. German tanks, often fighting in communication isolation with no functioning radios, simply couldn't match this level of tactical flexibility and coordination. Before the Hellcat's legendary performance in Northwest Europe captured headlines and attention, the Italian campaign had already provided German forces with clear warnings about American tank destroyer capabilities. During May 1944, as part of the breakout from the Anzio beachhead, the 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion's Hellcats faced elements of the Hermann Göring Panzer Division in combat. The terrain, featuring dense vegetation, narrow roads, and numerous small villages, should have favored German defensive tactics, yet M18 crews achieved impressive results despite these limitations. This early demonstration of Hellcat capabilities went largely unheeded by German high command, which remained intensely focused on the massive battles raging on the Eastern Front, where the vast majority of German armored forces were committed against Soviet advances. Warnings from Italian theater commanders about American tank destroyer speed and tactics were apparently not widely distributed or studied at higher command levels. The winter of 1944-45 definitively proved that the Hellcat's tactical advantages actually increased rather than decreased in adverse weather conditions. The M18's wide tracks, combined with light weight, producing just 10.5 pounds per square inch of ground pressure, allowed movement through snow that completely trapped heavier German vehicles. German Tigers and Panthers, already struggling with chronic mechanical reliability problems, found their tactical mobility further reduced by severe winter conditions that their engines and transmissions were poorly equipped to handle. During the Battle of the Bulge, Hellcat crews exploited these challenging conditions with remarkable expertise. They used their superior mobility to race through areas where German heavy tanks became bogged down and immobilized, appearing behind German forward lines in locations where the presence of armored vehicles was thought to be physically impossible. This unexpected mobility in poor conditions contributed significantly to the successful defense of Bastogne and other critical road junctions. German forces desperately attempted various counter-tactics to address the growing Hellcat threat as American tank destroyer units achieved increasing success. Updated tactical manuals issued to panzer units recommended immediate smoke deployment. The instant M18s were identified in the area, essentially blinding German crews in hopes that the threat would pass before the smoke cleared. Other desperate measures included welding additional spare track links onto vulnerable side armor plates, though this proved completely ineffective against 76mm rounds, and creating deliberate ambushes with carefully hidden anti-tank guns positioned to catch Hellcats during their rapid movement. Nothing worked consistently or reliably enough to counter the Hellcat threat. The vehicle's fundamental combination of speed, adequate firepower, and tactical flexibility employed by well-trained crews proved essentially insurmountable given available German resources and tactical doctrine. The vehicle's very presence in a sector altered German command behavior significantly, with commanders becoming increasingly reluctant to commit armored reserves without conducting extensive reconnaissance first, thereby sacrificing operational initiative and momentum. In March 1945, near the critically important Remagen Bridge site, where American forces had captured an intact crossing over the Rhine River, M18s, from the 656th Tank Destroyer Battalion crossed the damaged Ludendorff Bridge, while it was too structurally compromised for heavier American vehicles to safely transit. They quickly established a defensive screen on the east bank that destroyed 11 German tanks attempting to approach the bridge and eliminate the bridgehead, including 2 massive King Tigers that couldn't maneuver quickly enough in the confined terrain along the river valley. This action clearly demonstrated the strategic value of the M18's lightweight construction in a way that transcended mere tactical considerations. While German heavy tanks required specific routes carefully chosen to accommodate their weight and specially reinforced bridges that could support up to 70 tons, Hellcats could use virtually any crossing that supported standard truck traffic, giving American commanders far greater operational flexibility when planning movements and offensives. April 1945 witnessed the Ruhr Pocket becoming a massive trap that ultimately captured most of German Army Group B. The 893rd Tank Destroyer Battalion's Hellcats conducted what military historians later considered exemplary tank destroyer operations, racing through collapsing German defensive lines at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour on cleared autobahn sections, appearing deep in German rear areas before commanders at the front even knew that American forces had penetrated their positions. These final operations in the European theatre demonstrated the M18 concept brought to its full operational maturity after years of development and refinement. The use of speed as a weapon, mobility as a form of armor protection, and surprise as the primary tactical advantage had become second nature to experienced Hellcat crews. German defensive positions that had been carefully designed and constructed to stop deliberate attacks by heavy tanks proved completely useless against vehicles that simply raced around strongpoints at highway speeds, bypassing resistance rather than directly engaging it. Post-war analysis conducted by U.S. Army historians comprehensively validated the M18 concept despite acknowledged limitations that had been apparent from the beginning. The 76mm gun's inability to penetrate Panther or Tiger frontal armor using standard readily available ammunition forced absolute reliance on flanking attacks and side shots, which were missions where the vehicle's exceptional speed became absolutely essential rather than merely helpful. With standard M62 APCBC rounds achieving only 93mm of penetration at 500 yards, and with the superior HVAP rounds remaining extremely scarce throughout the war, crews frequently had to close to what seemed like suicidal ranges for frontal engagements against German heavy tanks. Yet despite these limitations, the combat record speaks absolutely definitively. The 526 confirmed enemy vehicle kills achieved against 216 combat losses produced the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American armored vehicle deployed during World War II. This remarkable success came not from superior firepower or better protection, but from revolutionary employment of speed and mobility combined with superior crew training that emphasized aggressive action and tactical flexibility. The M18 Hellcat represented far more than just another armored vehicle added to the American arsenal. It embodied a completely different and revolutionary conception of how armored warfare could be conducted. While Germany had perfected the tank as a breakthrough weapon and mobile fortress emphasizing protection and firepower, America had created something genuinely new in military history: the pure Hunter tank destroyer designed specifically to seek out and kill enemy armor rather than engaging in the traditional tank versus tank slugging matches that German doctrine anticipated. The tank destroyer force's official motto of "seek, strike and destroy" proved genuinely prophetic when examined in light of actual combat results. By the war's end in Europe, American tank destroyer battalions claimed over 11,000 enemy vehicles destroyed in total across all theaters, with Hellcat-equipped units consistently achieving the highest kill ratios. The fundamental doctrine emphasized that tank destroyers were categorically not tanks and absolutely shouldn't attempt to fight like tanks. They were specialized hunters that struck from carefully planned ambushes and then vanished before enemy forces could effectively respond. Beyond tactical success at the unit level, the Hellcat achieved strategic effects that influenced German operations far beyond individual engagements. German armored reserves, instead of being concentrated for offensive operations as doctrine dictated, were increasingly held back to guard against potential tank destroyer raids into rear areas. The mere confirmed presence of Hellcat units operating in a particular sector could effectively freeze German armored movement for hours, while commanders sought detailed confirmation of American tank destroyer locations before committing valuable and irreplaceable tanks. During the Ardennes offensive, intercepted German radio communications revealed commanders repeatedly requesting verification that no American Hellcat units were present in their operational area before committing armored reserves to attacks. Valuable hours were inevitably lost to additional reconnaissance efforts, and operational momentum was sacrificed to tactical caution. The offensive that was supposed to split Allied forces and recapture the vital port of Antwerp was partially paralyzed by fear of encountering vehicles weighing less than half of what a single Panther tank weighed. The 2,507 Hellcats that were ultimately built represented American industrial philosophy in its purest form. The emphasis wasn't on achieving perfection, but rather on practical efficiency that could be sustained at mass production levels. While Germany painstakingly built approximately 6,000 Panther tanks over 3 full years of production, constantly struggling with quality control issues and severe component shortages, Buick efficiently produced all M18 Hellcats in just 15 months using proven components and deliberately simplified construction methods. German engineers, when they had opportunities to examine captured M18 vehicles in detail, consistently noted what they perceived as apparent crudity in construction. They observed functional welds rather than perfect joints, armor plates showing obvious tool marks from manufacturing, and interior ergonomics that seemed almost accidental rather than carefully designed. Yet this supposedly crude vehicle consistently destroyed German tanks that had been built with literal watchmaker precision and represented the absolute pinnacle of German engineering expertise. The fundamental difference lay in completely different design philosophies and priorities. Germany built what were essentially engineering monuments, showcasing technical prowess and theoretical perfection. America built practical tools designed for mass production and ease of maintenance in field conditions. German vehicles required specialized tools and highly trained mechanics. American vehicles could be maintained with standard automotive tools by mechanics with basic training. Behind all these statistics and technical specifications lay genuine human tragedy affecting young men on both sides of the conflict. Young German tankers, with many still being teenagers by 1945 as the Wehrmacht scraped the bottom of its manpower resources, faced an enemy that completely negated everything they had been taught during their abbreviated training. Their carefully maintained Panthers and Tigers, representing the absolute peak of German engineering achievement and national pride, burned just as readily as any other vehicle when struck by Hellcat rounds, fired without warning from ambush positions. American crews, while suffering proportionally far fewer losses thanks to their superior tactics and training, carried their own psychological burdens from the nature of tank destroyer operations. The speed that consistently saved their lives also meant striking suddenly without warning, often giving German crews absolutely no chance to escape their vehicles before they were destroyed. The minimal armor protection meant that on those occasions when M18s were hit by German fire, catastrophic losses often resulted with little chance for survival, though interestingly, the open-top turret design actually significantly improved crew survival rates to over 80% compared to just 35% for German heavy tank crews trapped in their fully enclosed turrets when vehicles were penetrated. The M18 Hellcat's influence and impact extended well beyond World War II into the post-war era. Military forces around the world studied its combat employment carefully, recognizing that mobility could effectively trump passive protection under certain tactical circumstances. Modern military doctrine's heavy emphasis on shoot-and-scoot tactics, rapid displacement after engaging targets, and the use of mobility as a primary survival technique all trace their intellectual roots directly to M18 employment during 1944 and 1945. Today, at Fort Moore, Georgia, which was formerly known as Fort Benning, a carefully restored M18 Hellcat stands prominently at the entrance to the armor school where new generations of tankers receive their training. The vehicle's commemorative plaque identifies it as the fastest armored fighting vehicle of World War II and offers lasting proof that American ingenuity, combined with mass production capability, could successfully defeat sophisticated enemy tanks through speed combined with tactical innovation rather than attempting to match German vehicles in armor protection or gun size. The Hellcat measured 16 feet 10 inches in length, not including the gun, or 21 feet 10 inches including the main gun. It stood 8 feet 5 inches tall and measured 9 feet 5 inches in width. The crew consisted of 5 men, including commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver, who also operated the bow machine gun. Fuel capacity reached 165 gallons, providing an operational range of approximately 105 miles on roads. The maximum speed of 55 miles per hour on roads represented the highest of any tracked armored vehicle in World War II. The 76mm M18 gun could elevate from -10 degrees to +19 degrees. Ammunition stowage included 45 rounds of 76mm ammunition plus 800 rounds for the .50 caliber machine gun. The vehicle's ground pressure of just 10.5 pounds per square inch enabled mobility that heavier vehicles simply couldn't match. For comparison, the German Panther specifications included a weight of 44.8 to 45 metric tons, a power-to-weight ratio of just 15 horsepower per ton, and a maximum road speed of only 34 miles per hour. The Tiger I weighed a massive 57 metric tons, featured 100mm frontal armor, and only 1,347 were produced during the entire war. The Tiger II represented the ultimate expression of German heavy tank philosophy at 69.8 metric tons, 150mm frontal armor, but only 492 were ever manufactured despite their fearsome reputation. The supreme irony that emerges from studying the entire Hellcat story is that German tactical doctrine and design philosophy actually created the precise conditions necessary for American tank destroyer success. By building increasingly heavy tanks, including Panthers, Tigers, and King Tigers, each generation heavier than the last, Germany systematically created slow, road-bound targets that were nearly perfect for Hellcat hit-and-run tactics. Had Germany instead continued developing lighter, more mobile tank designs emphasizing speed and maneuverability, the Hellcat's fundamental advantages would have been significantly minimized, if not entirely negated. Every single ton of weight added to German tank designs to improve protection made them progressively more vulnerable to American tank destroyers that fought by refusing to engage in the type of direct slugging matches where German armor superiority would have been decisive. The relentless pursuit of theoretically invulnerable supertanks created vehicles that ultimately couldn't respond effectively to high-speed mobile warfare as actually practiced by well-trained American crews. In building mobile fortresses, Germany inadvertently made itself vulnerable to enemies that fought like mechanized cavalry, essentially fielding racing cars equipped with powerful guns that struck suddenly and vanished before any possible retaliation. The M18 Hellcat comprehensively proved that battlefield victory doesn't necessarily require fielding the absolute best equipment by every technical measure. Instead, victory requires fielding the right equipment for the specific war being fought and employing it properly according to sound doctrine developed through realistic training. German crews, sitting in their magnificent Panthers and Tigers, representing the absolute pinnacle of armored vehicle engineering, were consistently defeated by American crews operating in vehicles that appeared impossibly vulnerable by any conventional assessment. The Hellcat remains one of military history's greatest and clearest examples of doctrine successfully defeating superior technology when properly applied by well-trained personnel who understood their mission. Military historian Stephen J. Zaloga, one of the most respected authorities on armored warfare, characterized the M18 as poorly balanced from a pure technical standpoint, while simultaneously noting that its combat success was primarily attributable to the exceptional training and dedication of its crews rather than to what he considered an ill-conceived basic design. Yet this critical assessment arguably misses a crucial point that combat results make obvious. The deliberate poor balance favoring extreme speed over armor protection was precisely and intentionally what enabled the revolutionary tactics that ultimately produced the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American armored vehicle throughout World War II. The design wasn't poorly balanced by accident, it was deliberately optimized for a specific tactical employment that conventional thinking considered impossible. For German tank crews fighting desperately during 1944 and 1945, 3 minutes represented all the time they typically had available. 3 minutes elapsed from the first distant sound of high-revving right radial engines to the devastating impact of 76mm armor-piercing rounds. 3 minutes to identify the threat's location, traverse their turret to face it, acquire the target through their gun sights, and fire their weapon, all while the Hellcat was already racing toward its next firing position at 55 miles per hour. 3 minutes that usually ended with their tank engulfed in flames and the attacking Hellcat already vanishing into the distance, actively seeking its next victim rather than remaining to confirm the kill. The Hellcat comprehensively proved that in modern mechanized warfare, pure speed doesn't just kill enemy vehicles. Properly employed, it renders enemy strength completely irrelevant by refusing to fight on the enemy's terms. The German crews who somehow survived those terrifying 3 minutes learned a lesson that would fundamentally reshape armored warfare doctrine in the post-war era. Sometimes the most effective armor isn't thick steel plate, but rather not being where the enemy can shoot you when they pull the trigger. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the gun with the largest caliber or highest muzzle velocity, but rather the one that fires from a position where the enemy doesn't expect any threat to appear. Sometimes the greatest victory in war comes not from building the strongest or most heavily armed vehicle, but from building the right vehicle for the specific war you're actually fighting, rather than the theoretical war you wish you were fighting. In those 3 critical minutes lay the fundamental difference between old military thinking and new approaches, between fighting the previous war and adapting to fight the current one effectively, between pursuing theoretical perfection and embracing practical pragmatism. The M18 Hellcat, deliberately under-armored by any conventional standard, outgunned by German tanks in direct comparison, and dismissed by some contemporary critics as poorly designed, nevertheless achieved what German supertanks ultimately could not deliver: genuine battlefield dominance through speed, comprehensive training, and revolutionary tactical employment that exploited American advantages while avoiding German strengths. For German tank crews who found themselves facing M18 Hellcats during those desperate final months of the war, 3 minutes represented a lifetime of experience compressed into moments. For most of them, it proved to be all the lifetime they had remaining.